Do the one that's attached to the mic, like internal, right?
Which one is that?
I need glasses, guys.
Is this the audio device?
Yeah.
We can now. We can hear you.
You can hear us?
You can hear us?
Great. Everyone can hear us. Awesome. Okay, so we'll start again. That was a good lesson in satire, trying to get this off the ground. My name's Andrew. I work here at VOA. I work with Cal. We're on a show called HashtagVOA, which looks at what's trending in the news. And we were asked to come here and talk to you about satire because we're very satirical, I guess. So
Allegedly.
So we can open it up to some questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask away. You can type them on the side. You can use this Q&A module thing.
And let us know where you're from or where you're typing in from.
Yes, please. Let us know where you're from.
Come on.
Anyone at all.
Question. Kosovo. Cool. How's Kosovo?
And you can, if you're muted, you can be unmuted if you're. You should be able to.
Is everyone in the chat? Is Budapest? Wow.
So everyone's. Folks from Ukraine usually.
Okay.
So it's going swimmingly.
Yes. Doesn't it? I mean. So
otherwise, it's just going to be us riffing on satire for 45 minutes. So if you have any questions, ask away. But in the meantime, we can start talking, I guess, about satire and journalism.
Sure. So our show tries to do satire because we work inside an establishment, the U.S. government, but we're kind of the anti-establishment show.
And the U.S. government is not really known for being satirical, so we're trying to.
So that helps us hugely because when we make jokes, people don't expect us to make jokes.
We don't have to exceed go at a very high level. It's not hard to exceed the U.S. government in terms of being funny. So.
In terms of humor.
Right.
That's
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we can poke fun at the Department of Defense. We often do. We poke fun at the Department of Justice. We recently have on the FIFA story. Because the IRS
fun of the Germans.
I made fun of Germany. Well, I didn't make fun of Germany as a whole. I just apologized
as a football.
to Germany, right? Because I called London the heart of international football.
Right.
Oh, do you find?
Wait.
Stand by.
Okay, we have a question here from. It looks like I can't read what that says.
Oh, good. This is actually an excellent question. Do you find it possible to make satire about war events?
Whoa, slow down.
If you do, please explain how you would make jokes about war issues. Possible cartoons, satirical articles.
And this is from
Tatiana
from Ukraine.
In Ukraine. Okay. War is tough to joke about, obviously, right?
Yes.
I mean,
so.
this is a great question because.
But you should talk about your background in covering war too, because before Cal came here, he was working for CNN.
I spent 5 to 7 years roughly in Iraq. I covered the war in Lebanon. I covered the war in Georgia. War is a tough one. The jokes that you can make about wars are generally political ones. There are a few very, very difficult areas that are almost no-go areas. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is almost impossible to joke about because people are so passionate about that conflict. Iraq is something that has become free game in this country to be satirical about. The decision-making leading up to Iraq, the controversy about weapons of mass destruction, people joke about that now. WMD. Right. People link Syria to what happened there. So you can joke about the issues, you can't joke about events on the ground. The other interesting thing I think on this subject is there's been enough time now between the initial invasion in Iraq in 2003. We are now 13 years past that. So there's a generation of journalists now coming into journalism, coming on the air, that didn't witness what happened in Iraq, so they're removed enough where they can joke a little bit about the politics leading up to the war. So my answer would be you could joke about the politics. We do joke about the politics.
Right.
We joke about the campaign, for example, the campaign for president now in the U.S.
It's only 517 days away.
517 days away, and people are just constantly talking about what they would have done if they had been George W. Bush, and that's stupid. I mean, how can you imagine what it was like to be George W. Bush?
And actually, on the point of George W. Bush, it was interesting during they do this White House Correspondents' Dinner where the president gives a speech, and it's a comedic speech, And George W. Bush one year, it was maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 years after the Iraq War started, did a little thing where he was, pictures of him looking under tables and things. He's saying, "Oh no, weapons of mass destruction here," and kind of making this joke. So I think we take cues from that too. If people start joking about that, then we can say, okay, well then I guess it's okay.
Then we know it's
to
okay.
joke about it as well.
And that's a great. Okay, another question. Excellent, awesome. Where'd it go?
Wait, hold on. Hold on. Oh, here it is. We got the comment.
Can you go to? Let's just say I'm inspired by the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Is there a limit or not that you shouldn't go through, considering that rules of social norms are relative, socially constructed as well, just as religion and religious prophets and figures are? Yes. Yes, you can go too far.
Yeah.
Race and religion is a very, very difficult thing for us to cover because our audience is global. So jokes that would work here in the U.S. Won't work overseas. Right now, we're in a very, very tough race period here in the U.S. Because of what's happened in Baltimore, what's happening in the Middle East. That's something we can't joke about. The Charlie Hebdo was a very difficult subject for us to cover. We had to make a very tough editorial decision on whether or not to show that cartoon, and we decided to put it on the website as a blind thing so the viewer could decide whether or not to click on it. That is a very tough one. That's almost as close to a no-go area for making jokes as anything, I think.
Yeah, and we had talked about this, I think it was a couple weeks ago when we were talking about, did the discussion on free speech and how far is too far. And actually we mentioned the choice to put, I guess it was, click here if you'd like to see the Charlie Hebdo cover.
Right.
So giving people that power to do that.
And I think part of what's hurt everybody from being able to joke about that has been the extremes have taken over. What is her name? The woman who runs these cartoons.
Oh, Pamela Geller?
Pamela Geller. So somebody like Pamela Geller has taken things so far.
And she's the one who created this Draw Muhammad cartoon contest, and she's this kind of figure of anti-Islamophobia and craziness.
Right. So I wouldn't. Yeah. So I hate to say it. I mean, I'm a fan of let's all talk about everything and get it all in the open. But the Charlie Hebdo thing just changed the landscape a bit on that. Yeah. Should journalists and satirists be treated differently? Yes, I think so. I think that and comics. I think.
Yeah. But there's blurring of lines because you have folks like Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert here in the U.S. that are serving a journalistic role, but then we ask, are they journalists or are they comedians? And it's kind of it's a gray area.
More people get their news from Jon Stewart than I think any other source now in the U.S. So part of the reason for that is that so many of the issues that go on here in the U.S. are comical. I mean, they are. It's too easy sometimes, and especially with our politics in this country, it's too easy. Hillary Clinton with her email. I mean, we should be able to joke about that until the end of time and not be brought up on it. Can satire news create public opinion, and how can they do this?
Let's end. I want to finish the thought on that.
Okay.
Should be treated differently. Yes, but I think that, like I said, it's a gray area. I think that once you, even if you're a comedian or a satirist and you're providing this role as a news, someone who's conveying news to people, you have to be aware of your actions. I think you have to operate with some journalistic ethics. But then you have people that are, clearly one-sided that are satirists and things. And like Stephen Colbert is interesting because he pretends to be this very conservative.
You're saying you're worried about people that push an agenda.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to, you have to kind of, it's a gray area.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Can satirist news create a public opinion? Yes. So this is an interesting area now because we work for U.S. International Broadcasting. U.S. International Broadcasting is funded by the U.S. government. There are people in places like Russia who will say we are a propaganda tool, that we are a weapon of information. In fact, that's exactly what they have said. So yes, and there are countries and governments that are using satire to push their agenda. there was a great graphic on Russian state TV of the FIFA logo being crushed by an eagle with red, white, and blue stars and talons, and it was obviously an American eagle crushing this FIFA logo. So yes, I think without question, you can help people form an opinion maybe that they wouldn't have had otherwise. Absolutely, I don't think there's any question about that. And again, I think it goes back to the news now is being delivered by so many different people, and it seems as though the people that are really grabbing people are people like Jon Stewart, Russell Brand. Russell Brand is mastering this kind of keep it satire but push a message. He pushes a big anti-Fox News message, and he does exactly that. He tries to form public opinion.
And he calls people out and he gets millions of YouTube views, but
Right.
then do you think he has to operate with some kind of journalistic ethics?
No,
or some kind
he
of,
doesn't
can
seem
just-
to at all.
Okay.
And I think because he's hiding under what, and I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, from Kosovo. Josa? I think Josa is probably how you pronounce it. I think the V is maybe silent. But Josa, I'm sorry. But I think that's what, I think she's right. He's hiding behind that shield.
Yeah.
I do satire, I'm a comic, I'm not a journalist, I'm just bringing you...
This is the
the
information
funny.
I'm conveying.
Right, I'm bringing the funny.
But now so that differs though from Jon Stewart then, right? Or it does it? I don't know.
I think Jon Stewart is more respected because he sits behind an anchor desk.
But does that?
They frame it as a newscast.
So then are they bound by journalistic, mores and ethics?
More so than he is, I think.
Okay, but it's still.
But that's a gray area.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Hang on.
Let's see.
In traditional societies, how can we educate the public to accept easily satire and embrace it? Arbor from Kosovo. Man, this is a tough
How
one.
can we educate the public to accept easily? It's hard because the public is sometimes not as receptive to satire. So again, Stephen Colbert here in the U.S., he's this comedian, and he has this news show where he portrays a conservative. He's not actually, but he has this character that he plays, and people will actually take it to be serious. Another example is there's a website here in the U.S. called The Onion, and it's a satirical website, and they put funny headlines up and things, and people will share them as real headlines and not realize that they're fake. So I think it's.
But I think she's asking, or he's asking. Sorry, he's asking in places like Iran, right?
Right.
This is like China. This is a problem. Well, not a problem.
I think you do it, and you put those things out there as satire, and then you within the satires as a kernel of truth or information, then you're helping to get people information through.
But what happens when the Jon Stewart of North Korea, of Iran, of China, of Saudi Arabia is headed to jail? Then it's the responsibility of people in the U.S. and in the U.K. and in anywhere in the world where people have I lived in Israel off and on for a number of years because I just covered Middle East conflicts, right? Israel, you would think, is the last place in the world that would accept satire on its own policies, its military, its religion, its debates, and it's one of the most satirical societies that I've ever seen. In places like that, I think people need to cry out and scream, because the societies aren't going to change unless those people can be heard. So, and I know that becomes a bit of
Catch-22?
Not a catch-22, but we become like activists all of a sudden, and we're not trying to be activists, but in those kind of scenarios in traditional societies where people are being, thrown in prison, yes, I think, you got to speak out about it.
Right.
Scroll down. I think we got more.
Let's see one. Any other questions about anything satire related?
Yeah.
What?
So there's somebody there was raising their
This is Arbor?
like flipping it. No.
Which one?
3 over.
This one?
Nope.
This
there
one? Okay. Bosley.
Wait.
Let's unmute you.
Hang
Hold on.
Wait. We're having technical.
Let's unmute.
How do you?
Bosley.
Wait. Yeah.
Is he the microphone? It's not.
We can't hear you, Fosley.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Fosley froze.
He's frozen in time.
Fosley.
Well, you can feel free to type your questions, or if you're muted, you can unmute yourself at the top of the thing there. Okay, let's see if we get any comments or anything.
Oh, he left. He froze and left.
Oh, okay. Well, he'll come back. Any other Comments, questions? Let's see. Yes. Oh, there you are, Fazli.
Okay, I have a question. Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I will put it like this. Does news satire have limits? Do's and don'ts. Does news satire have do's and don'ts? Considering news with huge and dramatic impact on audience, let's say an example in a daily show with Jon Stewart, as you mentioned previously, Jon Stewart, in his first show after 9/11 tragedy, Stewart had a very emotional presentation in his show. He was in grief and even cried during the show. I think that news satire show made people cry that day and not laugh at all. Should news satire have do's and don'ts when dealing with a very sensitive issues that have huge emotional impact? So,
I have a question though for you. Was that for you, that moment that you're talking about, Jon Stewart? Was that a powerful moment? Like, could you feel that that worked, or did that not work for you?
yeah, actually, it was a very powerful moment because I was watching the news satire.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen to me before that news satire to make people feel sad, let's say, because the intention of news satire is to make a fun of the situation,
Right.
and not make them feel sad. So, do journalists have do's and don'ts when they do news satire?
Yeah,
Should
I think.
Personal constraints, let's say. Okay,
Yeah,
I will
I think-
unmute myself now, and I will listen to you.
Okay.
No, it's a great question, and I think people struggle to figure out where that line is. There was a great moment that I will always remember. It was Saturday Night Live.
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah, after which event? It was the shooting.
Oh no, I was going to talk about
The
something
kids
different.
died, and they
Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook.
So
the Sandy Hook massacre, a school here in the U.S., and I mean it was
like 20 some odd
26
kids,
or
young
so.
kids in first grade, like,
Were
7, 8 years old,
in
killed.
a mass shooting, and it was, it was chilling. It was a chilling event for this country, as for any country when you see the kids in the school get killed. Saturday Night Live opened their show with the I'm still emotional when I think about it, with the Boys and Girls Choir of Harlem singing Silent Night.
Mm.
And because
It was
tuning
right
in-
around Christmas.
Right,
so
and
it's-
because you're tuning in to expect what you're saying, which is you're expecting that satire, it becomes, I think, so much more powerful when the satire-type shows take a step back and say, this has hugely affected me, this has hugely affected us, and they make a statement like that. That has incredible power, but I think you have to pick and choose your spots.
Yeah.
Right? If you do that, too much, it's going to water down and it's not going to work. This was a huge question. You mentioned 9/11. After 9/11, there was this question about, again, the show Saturday Night Live,
Right.
which is Saturday Night Live is a mainstay here in the U.S. It's just the stalwart kind of satire show, and people were debating how long until Saturday Night Live can come back. And the joke that they made was they had the mayor of New York on, and they had Lauren Michaels, who's the executive producer of Saturday Night Live. Lauren Michaels turned to the mayor of New York and said, "Can we be funny again?" And the mayor of New York said, "Well, why would you start now?" And it just kind of...
It was like a relief. It was
It
like
just-
and it
yeah.
made it okay to be, like I said, taking cues from the mood and from leaders and determining what you can and can't talk about. That was a moment when it's okay again. We can now talk about this.
I think the flip side of that, and then I'll be quiet and I'll let you
Okay.
pick up. The
No
flip
worries.
side of that is when there's a tragedy overseas, it's incredibly difficult to gauge how to handle that. So in the U.S., it's, because we're here, the Sandy Hook massacre, people were able to wrap their heads around it. I remember the massacre in Beslan, at the school in Beslan, where the Chechen rebels went into that school, and that was so incredibly horrifying. I don't know. I think it took months for people here to even wrap their heads around it, because you become oversensitive about foreign cultures, and I don't ever want to be going too far with someone else's tragedy, and I think that's important for us.
Right. You mentioned Jon Stewart. Doing some.
Do you remember this?
You mentioned Jon Stewart, and I think that's when you see things like that. It's the intersection of humanity with cool when they're, doing journalism. Sorry, actually, is it Andrea? I think.
Unless she has a question.
Unless she has a question.
Maybe she has a question.
All right. Okay, we'll continue. No, she's gonna mute it.
Is she trying to ask me?
I don't think so.
Anyway, I hope that answered
Sorry.
your question.
Yeah, just having some technical things. But yeah, with Jon Stewart, and you see that it's there's a humanity to it too, and it's hard to sometimes grasp when you're doing satire. And it's what line do you have to go up to, but you can't cross, and that's backfired on people too. With
and again, I think
tragic events, they've tried to make fun of certain things, and they just do not work, and they get tons of backlash for that. So it's definitely dependent on the mood. It's dependent on what you're trying to say.
But again, it's also like we can, in the U.S., our satire shows will handle the tragic events of the U.S. They shouldn't handle tragic events overseas, right? So if there's a tragic event in Ukraine or in Budapest or in Kosovo, it's not for us to bring the funny, bring the satire. We would like to, personally, my view is we carry that local product.
And I think there's other ways to do satire too, like Michael Moore is a filmmaker, did the Bowling for Columbine movie, where he went to the first shot of the movie is he goes to a bank, and when you open an account at the bank, they give you a gun, and it's about how how many guns there are in the U.S. And so that is so this is the first scene in the movie. They give you the gun right there in the bank.
We make fun of guns a lot because everybody in America has a gun, and I don't understand it.
Yeah.
There's another question.
Yes, we have another question.
Too many guns in America. I mean, it's ridiculous. News satire sometimes can be misunderstood. How can news satire use a language that everyone understands the message?
That's the tough thing, is that people sometimes don't realize it's satire. As Anderson Cooper, who's a journalist here in the U.S., there's a satirical website that said that he had said something funny in a graduation speech. He said, "I never said that. That's a misquote." And he didn't realize it was a satire site, and he had to go back and walk back and say, "Oh, my mistake. It was satire." So even among journalists, there's not always a recognition that things are satire.
And you can go too far. And Twitter is incredibly dangerous for so many journalists because they'll go too far. They'll start going down a road making jokes. I have a colleague from CNN who recently was fired because he went too far making jokes about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And as we mentioned, that's a particular conflict where satire is sometimes just best left undone.
Right. There's a difference, I think, between trying to be funny and trying to be satirical. And people sometimes, when they try to grasp at it to be funny, it can backfire. When you're satirical, I think it's kind of highlighting either an injustice or something that you want to call attention to news-wise. It's not just a joke. It has a deeper meaning, and I think that's where Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and John Oliver now on his show, I think they've done a good job because they make these jokes, but they always have a point.
Yeah.
And that's the crux of satire, is that you're trying to make a point and you're trying to get information across, not just make a joke about something and have it be a one-off.
Or you're trying to raise awareness. So I joke a lot about guns. I'm inherently trying to get people to pay attention to the gun issue in America. So I'm joking about it to try to raise awareness on it. I joke a lot about American football, the NFL. I do that because I think as a society, we need to discuss certain things. Diana has a question. Diana from Hungary. We'll have to write a satirical article about a movie. Could you share some tips or guidelines with us? Which movie?
Home Alone.
Home Alone.
Oh, I love Home Alone. That's one of my favorite movies.
Really?
Yeah, I love Home Alone. Why? Why do you say that like it's not a good movie? I love Home Alone.
Oh, it's a good movie.
It's a great movie.
I need to show my daughter.
Cal was too old for Home. Home Alone was past his time because he's old.
Didn't take you long to go there.
No, I didn't. So I'm using satire to draw attention to Cal's age.
Home Alone.
So Home Alone. I mean, the one thing that people, I've seen articles written about Home Alone. They say, none of the neighbors had any idea that this kid was home alone, and all these firecrackers are going off and things, and everyone was just totally fine with that.
So there you go. Because now I'm remembering the movie, right?
Right.
In this country, if you had firecrackers going off and people being tarred and feathered, there would be a SWAT team there.
Oh yeah.
In 3.5 seconds. They would all look like they've just gotten off an armored personnel carrier in the middle of Afghanistan.
And then
they
the
would
criminals
storm the residence.
And everyone would be killed and shot.
Right. Yeah. Right. And there would be gunfire.
Firebomb the house.
Right.
And then
Macaulay Culkin would be blown up by some ATF agent.
Right. Or there's one point where it's like there's a pizza delivery man and Macaulay Culkin tricks him. He puts the firecrackers in and he puts on a mobster movie. So it sounds like the guy's getting shot up. And I'm like, the pizza delivery didn't call any police.
Right. And in a neighborhood, and you can joke about the neighborhood, like that's an upscale.
Right. If they see someone, who doesn't look like they belong in the neighborhood, they're going to call the police and have a SWAT team come. So let alone, having this kid be alone.
In reality, the movie Home Alone in this country would have ended in bloodshed. Yeah.
So that's some things you can talk about in terms of satire. The fact that an 8-year-old who, I think it's the line in the movie, it's like, can't tie his shoes, but he can set up all these things and rig up all these things. Or the other angle you could take with it too is that it's the weaponization of America. That the first thing the kid thinks to do, rather than call his parents or try to call his police or go to a neighbor, is okay. I'm going to try to kill these two guys by throwing paint cans at them and trying to blow them up and do all these things. So
yes, we are the peace-loving country until we go to war.
Yes,
very good at
and
that.
if you're an 8-year-old child, watch out.
Okay, a couple more questions. I'm
Okay.
loving this now. All right, Andrea, I'm sorry. The typeface is really small, so I don't mean to
what is it
massacre
here?
people's names.
What is
What
the
is the
limit
limit?
on joking on Facebook or to be ironic? That's another fine line. I think people sometimes go too far on social media. Again, they try to be funny, but they don't try to use it in a. I'll say that instead of using a scalpel, they'll use like a hacksaw kind of thing. They'll try to be very blunt and they'll try to be very funny and go for laughs, but it's not necessarily a crafty way of using it to be satire and draw point to something.
And I think Facebook was just a Department of Defense and CIA plot to spy on everybody.
Cal's other job is a conspiracy.
So I don't do the Facebook because I think it's just like an excuse to spy, and so I'm good without the Facebook.
We've already set up an account for Cal.
But that is, it's no joke. But that's that's part of the Facebook thing is you got to be careful. Twitter, man, so many journalists, and just keep in mind when you're being funny. In my Twitter feed, I try to be funny on it, but I got to remember, like, those tweets live forever. They live forever. So you can be jokey funny about, like, I'm always giving Qatar a very difficult time for their labor practices, and I know that means I'll likely never work at Al Jazeera, and you have to keep that in mind. Like, it's just, those tweets never go away.
Yeah. For journalists, I think it's, it's tough too when you're trying to be objective, but you want to draw attention to these things and be funny in your social media. There's a line between your day job and your life, I think, and that's something to be aware of. That you're always, being monitored, even if it's your personal opinion or you're trying to put satire or something.
Never drink and tweet.
Yeah.
Never. Just don't. It's like just don't drink in Facebook. Don't drink and tweet. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. So if you're a journalist, it's better not to joke.
Wait, no, you skipped a question.
No. Well, okay. This is a follow-up to. This is a follow-up.
No, you ran over Rona.
Well, we're gonna go back to Rona.
Bulldozed Rona's question and then right over. All right. Learn practice or people. It's all cut off now.
Oh, okay. Well, let me scroll.
Hang on.
All right. We're getting to you, Rona. Don't worry.
Well. Okay, oh, there it is. Okay. Should just have their own ability that comes from inside personality to do it. It's a tough thing to learn. I don't know. I mean, again, people like Russell Brand, it just comes so naturally. People like Jon Stewart, there's a limit, I think. I don't think just anybody could do what Jon Stewart does. I think there's an inherent talent there.
And that's when you see when people try to do what Jon Stewart does and they fail miserably. That's when you see it's not funny, and then you see those people get fired, or get lambasted on social media because they tried to be like Jon Stewart. And
I think, and funny is the hardest thing to succeed at on TV. I mean, this is why a comedy TV shows don't last very long and they're few and far between. Funny is so hard.
Yeah. So Andreas, I was following up to Andreas' question. Okay, great. So if you're a journalist, it's better not to joke. It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're an opinion columnist and someone you have a clear leaning one way or the other, opinion columnists make jokes. Maureen Dowd is a famous op-ed columnist for New York Times. She makes jokes to varying degrees of success.
Yeah.
But she jokes around a lot of other things. If you're trying to be a straight news journalist and just report hard news, it's not funny.
Maureen's just not funny.
Maureen's not funny.
This is our executive producer John is over here weighing.
He's heckling us. He's just heckling us from off screen, basically. But I also think we have to remember sometimes in journalism we cover such serious stuff that you just do need a bit of levity. I mean, there are times where it's just, you're covering something so grim that, the one way to save the group you're working with is by cracking a joke.
Gallows humor, dark humor,
Yeah, dark humor.
Joking about.
I mean,
and movies do this a lot.
Ebola, the Ebola crisis here, people got so scared, and some people were questioning the tactics of politicizing Ebola, and one way to expose that was people like Jon Stewart were showing that and being satirical about it and saying, imagine if you lived in Liberia, how scared you'd be, not just Illinois. And that, that's very dark humor. That's a very difficult line to walk, but people like him who, are very talented can do it, I think.
And Jon Stewart, too, in addition to taking politicians to task, he takes the news media to task as well. And there are a lot of instances where the news media, rather than using satire, they're using, hyperbole, or a lot of times in the U.S. here it'll be,
everything is breaking news.
Bomb scare, breaking news, a suspicious package was found in someone's lunch.
We've gone the way of, if you have access to Sky News on your satellite, America's gone that direction where everything is big banner, breaking news, everything is always developing.
Right. So Jon Stewart takes them to task, too, so he uses the satire to call them out and keep them in line.
We're going to take a picture of this bullshit.
Cal is documenting this chat for all of eternity. Let's see. Bosley says news satire is called also fake news. Does that mean that the whole news satire content is fake or just partially fake? You can have real news and be satire. There are some shows that are kind of branded as fake news, or like I said, The Onion, which is the satirical paper in the U.S. It's all fake. It's like they had a picture of Joe Biden washing his car in the White House lawn,
but then
shirtless. Like those kind of things are just fake.
But then you have people like John Oliver. John Oliver does a fake news show on HBO, and he went to Russia and interviewed Snowden. So there are times where that fake news show is reaching so many people, and this is the Jon Stewart phenomenon. So many young people, people in their 20s and 30s, are getting their news from Jon Stewart. So if you're Snowden, if you're a politician in this country, going on Jon Stewart is going to give you more exposure to that group of people than going on the nightly news. The nightly news here, the traditional newscasts now in the U.S. are directed at people 50 and over. That's just kind of the way traditional media's gone. So these fake news programs now hit at that audience, and so people use that, especially politicians. I mean, it's only a matter of time before Hillary Clinton, as she really heats up her run for president, is on The Daily Show.
Right, or President Obama. President Obama was on Stephen Colbert. And
everyone went on Saturday Night Live. You run for president, you've got to go on Saturday Night Live. It's
and you've got to poke fun at yourself, and you've got to make the rounds in the comedy world and do that.
The amount of Chris Christie fat jokes that are coming your way in the next 500 and how many days?
17 days.
17 days are going to be epic.
No, but who's counting?
He's going to have to make fun of, and people have to show that they are versatile to making fun of themselves.
Right.
And George W. Bush was very good at this.
Yeah.
He was very good at this.
He was likable because he could make fun of himself.
And like you said at the White House Press Correspondents' Dinner, there's no WMD.
Right.
I mean, you have to be willing to laugh at yourself in politics here.
And to the question earlier about can you acquire these skills or are you born with it, if you watch some clips from the Daily Show or the Colbert Report, you see some of the politicians that go on there, you can see which ones can do it and which ones can't. Because there are some people that go on there and they joke along and they do a great job, and that's how they get their message across. They realize that it's a satirical program, so they have to get their message across in that satire. There are some people that just go on and try to be serious and it just falls flat, and they are better off in a more serious setting. So,
yeah.
But if you watch, it's interesting to see who can do it and who can't. Okay. Any other questions that we have? Topics that we can discuss. Let me check the Q&A module. Check if anyone's emailed us.
This is very high tech for me. I mean,
Cal is not used to using a computer.
I can barely work my phone, so this is really impressive what's going on right now.
But yeah, do you have any other thoughts, Cal, on satire?
No, I think it's an exceptionally important. Oh, scroll down there. There's another one. I think it's as we've talked about. It's a great tool, but it's you have to be.
It's not just the United States. The French have Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah,
the Germans have.
Yeah, no, and we were talking about that. I was saying one of the interesting things we were talking about, and I think it's always worth discussing, is that line that you don't want to cross. And there are certainly subjects that are polarizing, that make it very, very difficult.
So we have another question from Bosley asked, who is your favorite satirist? I mean, we've talked about Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert. They've been the ones to do it in the digital age, and it's gone, all over the internet. It's so they're the ones that have kind of led this forefront. It's this shift in media that you have, like Cal said, a lot of young people getting their news primarily from Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert. I really liked Andy Rooney, who is basically, I think he was like a kind of a crotchety old man for like the last 40 years of his life. But Andy Rooney would do the segment at the end of 60 Minutes, which is kind of a news magazine show. They would do these pieces every Sunday night. It's one of the top-rated shows in the country still. It's been on for about 40 years, I think. And Andy Rooney would come on and say, I don't understand why they give you such tiny ketchup packets. And you talk about these inane things, but he would also do talk about serious issues. But he would look at it through this lens of he was kind of just complaining about these things, and it was very funny. But he did it in a way that made you think about them. And he did it in a way that was entertaining. So I think he was almost like kind of a precursor to some of the satirists we see, to Jon Stewart's and Stephen Colbert's, because they're drawing attention to these issues, but doing it in a funny way. He was doing that. And they weren't always serious issues, like I said, but when they were serious issues, he was
ahead of his time, definitely. I like Jon Stewart a lot. I think he was, a trailblazer for what he's doing, and I like what Russell Brand's doing. I think Russell Brand can be a bit brash, and sometimes he goes to that place that you don't want to end up, where you risk offending people. But I mentioned Russell Brand because what he's doing online, just from a technical standpoint, the way he's penetrating audiences all over the world with humor, he's finding great success in that. So I admire the success he's had. Sometimes his humor is a bit Russell Brandish.
And to my point on Andy Rooney, there's one of my favorite pieces that he wrote. He says, you might be, you're a Republican, because the two parties are Republicans and Democrats. He said, you're a Republican if you eat dinner at 7 p.m., you're a Democrat if you eat dinner at 5 p.m. And it's silly, like a silly list like that, but it kind of speaks to different things. You think about, okay, well, what time do these people eat dinner? So what does that mean? Maybe they're getting home from a factory. Maybe they're, getting home and have to commute from a white-collar job or something. And so it kind of makes you think about those things. So I think satire can be a good tool for that, for inspiring thought, as well as getting information across. Okay, Arbor, I just wanted to give a short comment. Note if you can hear me. If you want to type it in, we can answer it, Arbor. Or you can try to.
Where's Arbor?
You can try to speak it. He's over here.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Probably now you can see.
We can hear you though. So.
Okay. Good.
Oh, now
you can't see me. I wanted just to comment that today I really like your discussion, and I really like also the discussion that we had in the class, because it's a very sensitive topic, and somehow you don't know how to even treat it and how you should go through it. But of course, I made some questions regarding the Charlie Hebdo attacks, because basically this has been like the latest bomb in the whole issue, and what actually brought us again to the debate of until what extent can we use satire in journalism? Is it too much? Are we kind of suppressing some ideas? Are we fostering some stereotypes? But I would just like to say that, in my opinion, satire is also an artistic expression. So we should also not forget that as an artistic expression, we are kind of suppressing this artistic expression. Journalism is a totally different thing for me. We are journalists. We are not. It's art in itself, but it's not art as a genre like it's satire. But for me, for example, when talking about Islam, I know that for Islam, in Islam it is sacrilegious to depict Muhammad in different pictures or drawings. But just as I said, nothing has to be that much of absolute, that you don't have to make fun or mocking or kind of just depict somebody. So in my opinion, I think that of course there's a limit, there's a border that you should go through, but that's again very relative. And I don't know who is about to judge and where is the border and where is not.
We have debated this issue since the attacks, and it's a constant discussion that happens here, and I think it's been I am 100% sure that it's happening in newsrooms all over the country. The conversation that we continue to circle back to is the following: you can support Charlie Hebdo's freedom of expression, freedom of artistic expression. You can support that right without endorsing what it is that they're putting on their front page, right? I mean, you can separate those two things, and I think we have to. We have to support freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and you can support that without supporting hate speech, right? I mean, you have to keep those separate, and this is a very sensitive issue because, as you rightly say, in Islam, it is sacrilegious to depict the Prophet, and so there are those in Islam. Look, I have Muslim friends who are not offended, right? I have Muslim friends who are exceptionally offended, and I've been surprised at sometimes who those people are, so much so that it's kind of changed my view of it, and I've been able to say, as a journalist, I know it sounds corny, as an American, I support that freedom of speech. That doesn't mean that I endorse what it is that people say. And I think that that's an important distinction to make. I'm not supporting necessarily what it is that Charlie Hebdo is saying, but I support Charlie Hebdo's right to exist.
I think that that's well put, and I think you touched on this, that there's a lot of gray area. Charlie Hebdo is one example, but in journalism generally, is a gray area between if you're reporting hard news, if you're doing opinion, if you're doing straight news, maybe you don't use satire. Even if you're an opinion columnist, you use it, very carefully. It depends on the situation. It depends on, like you said, it is an art form, and it is an art to using it. It's much more of a, it's a very kind of finesse thing. You can't just throw out jokes and hope they work.
The satire, the only one piece of satire that I hear on the Charlie Hebdo thing, and again, this is a very dangerous area to be satirical about, but, after the gunmen attacked those offices, there was a lot of journalists, traditional journalists who don't go into the area of humor in this country, saying, oh, great, now I have to support Charlie Hebdo, right? I mean, the attackers now have forced me to support a magazine that I actually think, this is not me speaking, other journalists were saying, a magazine that I consider to be a rag newspaper. Now I have to come out and I have to support Charlie Hebdo because of this attack. People were making a bit of satire about that. And Jon Stewart went down that road a little bit, saying, it's almost unfortunate that this has to become the beacon of freedom.
In journalism,
Arbor wants to come back with us with a follow-up.
Okay. Go for it, Arbor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, it's just that I do fully agree with everything that you're saying. That's basically the idea that I again I was supporting the artistic expression. I mean, there's literature where you use racism or you use satire, and I think that's needed because that's literature, and that basically it makes the whole figure all together. When you think of artistic expression, there's a totally whole debate, a different debate. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you a little bit. I mean,
the
difference between art and journalism, and we're seeing this blended. I mean, I think this is a very area because you want to give people room for freedom of expression, but you don't want to see a war start over it, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about. We should just talk about it. I'm for freedom of expression. I'm for people's rights to say what they want to say, and this is, this is a constant debate in this country, especially right now. You have freedom you want to say in this country. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. Right? You have the right to free speech, and you're protected under the U.S. Constitution from the federal government coming to your house and arresting you for your freedom of speech. You are not protected by the Constitution for your employer firing you. So I am free to say whatever it is that I want to say, and the police, cannot do anything to me. But VOA could fire me. Any information. And it doesn't matter. I think that's another important distinction that people sometimes forget. They sometimes think they're protected under the Constitution of this country when they're not.
A lot of journalists, traditional
I'm trying to.
journalists don't go into the area too important.
Any other questions that anybody has about?
Can you, I can hear myself.
No, that's why I wrote that.
Oh, okay.
Oh no, I didn't write that one. I heard. Okay, so we should be good. Any other questions that anybody has? Let me take a look at the emails. Any emailed in questions? No.
What happens when you scroll over people? Does that make them full screen? Is that what happens?
Let's see.
I'm just confused. 'Cause-
Yes.
Oh, right. Now I have to support Charlie and
Oh, I'm on like a delay. I can
Yeah.
hear myself.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like we're on a bit of a delay for some folks. Yeah. Any other questions or topics anybody has? Anything else about? And otherwise, we can have just maybe some closing thoughts. Do you have any closing thoughts on just satire that we haven't already discussed?
I think we've hit all the sort of really difficult ones. I mean, I think satire again. I think it's a very useful tool. It's a very dangerous tool.
Okay, we have actually one other question. Last one question.
Last question.
Are we allowed to insult others while we? Oh, everybody's asking questions now. What was that name? I can't see that. Are we allowed to insult others while we do sarcasm or satire news? I wouldn't directly insult someone and be, I wouldn't make fun of. It depends. So someone like Jon Stewart
You can make fun of yourself.
You can make fun of yourself.
You can insult yourself.
Someone like Jon Stewart can make fun. We talked about Chris Christie, who's the governor of New Jersey. He's running for president, and he's very overweight, to put it charitably. So Jon Stewart can make fun of his weight because he's a comedian. A normal, regular journalist wouldn't do that. They would get called out for that, and they'd get in trouble for that. And again, even Jon Stewart, I think if he was going to make fun of his weight, it would have to be some particular reason, like if he's, saying that his state is the healthiest in the country or something, then they could make fun of him for that and saying, "Oh, really? You're a healthy state? Well, look at, look at you." I think the more effective satire doesn't necessarily make fun of people. It makes fun of their ideas and concepts. And that's what Jon Stewart has done very well. Rather than making fun of people for who they are, their physical appearance or anything like that, he makes fun of people for what they say and what they believe. And questioning those ideas, I think that's a perfectly valid way to call people out. For journalists, I think you can do that as well. You're supposed to be calling people out on their opinions if you're an opinion columnist or an opinion writer. If you're a straight news reporter, I
still think you want to keep away from the insults.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't personally attack anyone.
Yeah. You can attack the idea.
You can attack their ideas for sure.
Attack the ideas. Yes.
Yeah.
Last question, and then I've got to run. Infotainment and news satire.
Is there any difference?
Yes, infotainment is what American media has become.
Yeah. Yes, infotainment is,
unfortunately,
like we kind of talked about the, there's a suspicious package, breaking news, let's all focus on that kind of thing. It doesn't really give you any good information. Satire is more challenging the norms, challenging the ideas.
But there's so much that can fall under infotainment. We were just talking about the now defunct Top Gear.
Right.
There are shows now. Traditional news is dying. Linear news is dying. The way that people get information is changing. People don't turn on their TVs anymore and watch for an hour of news. They go online and they grab what they want to grab. And so it's allowing and it's forcing people to deliver that news in different ways. So CNN here, domestically, you guys all see CNN International overseas. It's a totally different product than what we have here. We have CNN domestic. They're moving into infotainment. So a good example of this right now, and here in the U.S. we have these two murderers who were in a maximum security prison who escaped. They cut through a wall, they cut through a pipe, and they're Shawshank Redemption,
and they're on the loose. CNN U.S. has been covering this nonstop, and it's actually comical. And these are some things I'm sure tonight on Jon Stewart he's going to talk about this. Some of the headlines, breaking news: police dogs find wrapper that may have been used by the, or from food that may have been eaten by the two escaped. It's just like
It's infotainment.
It's infotainment, and it's driven by the economics of it. It's a 24-hour news cycle, and they have to sell ads, and they have to get people watching, so they have to do things that people are interested in,
And it's
they have to
two
do things that
people-
people are going to keep watching and tuning into.
And we're talking about 2 people in a country of 300 and some odd million.
300 million plus.
And
Yeah.
we're averaging, right now, this summer, we're averaging about 11 murders a week in Washington, D.C. We're averaging about 12 and a half in Baltimore. And the news cycle is right now stuck in infotainment land.
Right.
So I think Andrew's absolutely right. What you'll see today in this country, in the U.S., is we'll see wall-to-wall coverage on the prison break, and then tonight on the fake news shows, they'll slam it. They'll just rip it apart because we're not covering, what many people will see as important, more important
Right.
issues.
We're not covering the U.S. is committing advisors to Iraq to help fight Islamic State, and no one's covering that on CNN. They're covering these 2 prisoners, wall-to-wall breaking news coverage.
There was an oil spill off the coast of California that spilled 100,000 gallons of crude oil into right on the coastline,
Yeah.
and that's not made the news. So.
So that's the power of satire, really,
yeah.
is when you have this infotainment, you can call it out. And infotainment, I guess there's 2 different definitions. Someone would say Jon Stewart is infotainment because it's information and entertainment. I think that's kind of a good infotainment. It's like good and bad cholesterol. That's good infotainment, and then bad infotainment is when you have like CNN talking about, there was there's a family with 19 children, and they had this whole sex scandal thing. I don't want to get into details because it's terrible. But CNN is covering that wall to wall, and they're not covering Iraq, and they're not covering Iran nuclear negotiations, and those kind of serious news. So that infotainment, I think, is bad.
Or the migrant crisis.
There's very little coverage of that, I think, domestically in the U.S. VOA is covering it wall to wall because we have an international audience. But domestically, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they're not really covering it.
And the satire shows will keep them honest, which is good.
Right, so that's the good infotainment. The Jon Stewarts are good. The car chase journalism, or the
There you go.
That's the other thing. Anytime there's a car chase in the U.S., they'll immediately cut to a car chase and they'll follow the car in the helicopter overhead.
It's so dumb.
And it's just because they know people are going to watch that because it's infotainment, because it's entertaining, and they know people are going to tune in and watch, and the ratings are going to go up, and they make more money for ads, and yeah. We could go on for hours about the economics of news, but as far as satire, satire can be a good thing in preventing some of that, for sure.
Last one.
Okay.
We don't have this type of journalism. We don't have helicopters. You're lucky.
You're lucky. Yeah.
You don't need helicopters.
You can do good journalism with the tools you have, with the 1 square foot of real estate.
There was so here in the U.S. right now, Brian Williams. He made up that story about Iraq, and so he's been on the sidelines. And I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. And Lester Holt took over. Lester's a more serious anchor. He reads the news. He tells it like it is. I'm Lester Holt. And someone at NBC News had an idea. When the Amtrak, there was a train here that crashed about 2 weeks ago, went off the rails, killed 8 people, died. It was a tragedy. And they decided, we'll put Lester Holt in a helicopter over the crash for the full 30-minute nightly news. So he anchored in a helicopter with the thing on and the microphone.
And it was a stunt because there was no reason why he couldn't be on the ground.
Yeah, and he's reporting, I'm over the sea, and it was awful. It was gimmicky, it was bad, you could see through it, it didn't work. And sometimes technology is the enemy of journalism. Sometimes it's just get the news out and don't worry about, he was in a helicopter, it made no sense.
Yeah.
He was in a helicopter and he tossed down to the ground. It was almost satirical without.
And then the satirists, the Jon Stewarts make fun of him.
Everyone made fun of him.
Yeah.
Everyone made fun of him. Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, listen, guys. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, we only have an hour.
So much. Sorry, we have to cut this.
This room is going to be taken over.
But thank you all so much. If you have any other questions, you can email the group email or whatever.
Email us and request us again if you liked it. We'll do it again.
Yes, absolutely. But thank you all.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Great.